Maria Santos had always believed that courage was something you discovered when you had no other choice. On a cold December morning in 1943, as she crouched behind a crumbling stone wall in occupied France, watching German patrol boots march past just meters away, she realized her moment had arrived. The 26-year-old Spanish refugee had fled to France 3 years earlier, escaping the chaos of her homeland's civil war. She had found work as a seamstress in a small village near Lyon, living quietly and hoping to remain invisible until the world made sense again. But the world had other plans for Maria Santos. The trouble began when her neighbor, an elderly French woman named Madame Dubois, whispered desperately at her door one evening. The woman's grandson, Pierre, was part of the French resistance, and the Germans had discovered his identity. They were coming for him at dawn, and the family needed someone to guide him through the mountain passes to safety in Switzerland. Maria's first instinct was to refuse. She was not a fighter, not a hero. She was just a woman, trying to survive in a world gone mad. But when she looked into Madame Dubois' tear-filled eyes, something inside her shifted. Perhaps it was the memory of her own desperate flight from Spain, or perhaps it was simply the recognition that sometimes ordinary people must do extraordinary things. She agreed to help, and that single decision changed everything. The escape route wound through treacherous mountain terrain, far from main roads and German checkpoints. Maria had learned these paths as a child, visiting her grandmother's village on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees. She knew every hidden cave, every stream crossing, every place where a person could disappear if necessary. The journey with Pierre should have taken 12 hours. It took 3 days. On the first night, as they made their way through a dense forest, they stumbled into a German patrol conducting a routine sweep. Maria's heart hammered as she pressed herself against a tree trunk, listening to harsh German voices discussing their search pattern. Pierre was young and inexperienced, his breathing too loud, his movements too careless. When a branch snapped under his foot, the soldiers turned in their direction. Maria made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her war. Instead of running, she stepped out from behind the tree and began walking toward the Germans, speaking loudly in broken German about her lost goat. She played the role of a simple mountain woman, confused and harmless, asking for their help in finding her escaped animal. The soldiers laughed at the foolish peasant woman wandering the forest at night. They pointed her toward the nearest village and sent her away with rough humor and casual dismissal. Maria thanked them profusely and stumbled away, making enough noise to cover Pierre's retreat deeper into the forest. When she found him an hour later, hidden in a cave she had guided him to months earlier during a casual hiking trip, Pierre looked at her with new respect. But Maria felt something else stirring inside her, not pride, but a cold, calculating awareness. She had just learned that the Germans' greatest weakness was their own arrogance. They saw what they expected to see, and they expected to see helpless peasants, not dangerous opponents. The rest of Pierre's journey passed without incident, but Maria could not stop thinking about those German soldiers. She began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. Their patrol routes, their timing, their habits. She observed which of them was lazy, which was thorough, which drank too much at the local tavern. After delivering Pierre safely to Swiss contacts, Maria returned to her village with a dangerous new purpose burning in her chest. She would not simply survive this war. She would fight it, but not in the way anyone expected. Over the following weeks, she began establishing her network. She recruited her seamstress customers, women whose husbands were prisoners of war or forced laborers in Germany. She befriended the elderly priest who had access to travel documents. She cultivated relationships with farmers who knew every hidden path through the mountains. Most importantly, she learned to read the occupying forces like a hunter learns to read prey. Maria discovered that the local German commander, Hauptmann Müller, was a creature of rigid habit. He inspected the same checkpoints at the same times each day. His men relaxed their vigilance during their afternoon meal break. The night patrols followed predictable routes that could be timed to the minute. She began small. A message carried between resistance cells. A photograph of German defensive positions sketched quickly during a casual walk. Intelligence about troop movements overheard in the market square. But Maria's true genius lay not in gathering information, but in understanding psychology. She realized that the Germans were not just occupying French territory, they were occupying a foreign culture they did not comprehend. Their efficiency was also their blindness. They could not imagine that the quiet seamstress who mended their uniforms was mapping their weaknesses with every stitch. The transformation from hunted refugee to hunter began in earnest when Maria witnessed the arrest of the Moreau family. The father was suspected of harboring Allied airmen, though Maria knew he was innocent. She watched from her window as the Germans dragged him from his house while his wife and children screamed. That night, she made her first aggressive move against the occupiers. Hauptmann Mueller's staff car broke down on his way to regional headquarters the next morning. The mechanic would later discover that someone had carefully loosened several critical bolts, causing the engine to seize at precisely the spot where the mountain road offered no quick escape route. While Mueller waited for repairs in the cold morning air, his briefcase containing the week's intelligence reports somehow disappeared from the back seat of the disabled vehicle. The theft was so expertly executed that the Hauptmann never even realized when it happened. The documents found their way to resistance commanders within hours, revealing German plans for a massive sweep operation that would have destroyed 3 underground cells. The operation was quietly abandoned when resistance fighters melted away from the targeted areas just before the Germans arrived. Mueller suspected sabotage, but he could not identify the saboteur. How could he suspect the unassuming Spanish seamstress who had lived quietly in the village for years? How could he imagine that the woman who respectfully lowered her eyes when German soldiers passed was the same person who had just handed his enemies a devastating intelligence victory? Maria had discovered her calling, but she had also marked herself for death. She simply did not know it yet. In the shadows of the village, other eyes were watching, other minds were calculating. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and Maria Santos was about to learn that becoming the hunter meant accepting that you might also become the hunted. The game was just beginning, and the stakes were life and death. The knock came at 3 a.m, soft but insistent. Maria woke instantly, her hand moving automatically to the small pistol she now kept beneath her pillow. 6 months of underground work had taught her that unexpected visitors in the night brought either desperate allies or deadly enemies. She recognized the voice immediately. Father Bernard, the village priest, who had become her most trusted contact. But something in his whispered urgency made her stomach clench with dread. "They know," he said simply when she opened the door. "Someone talked. The Gestapo arrived 2 hours ago, with your name." Maria's mind raced through possibilities while her hands automatically began gathering essential items. The escape route through the back window. The false identity papers hidden in her sewing basket. The emergency signal system she had established with her network. But Father Bernard grabbed her arm as she reached for the window latch. "No. They are watching the house. Every exit, every possible escape route. This time, they came prepared." The priest's words hit her like cold water. For 6 months, Maria had operated with the confidence that comes from consistent success. She had guided 17 Allied airmen to safety. She had passed crucial intelligence that prevented countless arrests. She had sabotaged German operations with an almost artistic precision that left her enemies frustrated and blind. But success had made her careless, and carelessness in wartime was a death sentence. "Who betrayed us?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Father Bernard's face was grim. "Claude Moreau, the man you helped save from execution last month. The Gestapo arrested his daughter yesterday. He gave them everything to save her life." The irony cut deep. Claude Moreau was the father of the family whose arrest had first motivated Maria to take direct action against the Germans. She had risked everything to create false evidence, proving his innocence. Now he had repaid her mercy with betrayal. But Maria had learned to think like a hunter, and hunters do not waste time on regret. Perhaps an hour before they lose patience and storm the building. They want to take you alive for interrogation. Maria understood what that meant. The Gestapo would torture her for every name, every contact, every detail of resistance operations. Her capture would destroy the network she had spent months building. Worse, It would doom the dozens of people who depended on her for their survival. She looked around her small apartment, this place that had been her sanctuary and her prison. Then she smiled, and Father Bernard was surprised to see no fear in her expression. Only a cold determination that made him shiver. "Then we give them exactly what they want," she said. "We let them capture Maria Santos." What happened next became legend among the resistance fighters of the region, though few ever learned the full truth. At dawn, as German soldiers surrounded the building and Gestapo officers prepared for their interrogation, they heard a woman's voice calling from the apartment window. Maria Santos, they were told, was ready to surrender. She only asked for safe passage for the innocent priest who had tried to convince her to flee. The Germans agreed, confident in their victory. They had run the infamous female saboteur to ground at last. Father Bernard walked out of the building with his hands raised, was briefly questioned, and was released when they found nothing suspicious. What they did not know was that Father Bernard carried something extraordinary hidden in his vestments: detailed intelligence about German defensive positions that Maria had been gathering for weeks, information that would prove crucial in the coming Allied offensive. The woman who emerged from the apartment with her hands raised was indeed Maria Santos. But she was not the defeated fugitive the Germans expected to capture. Over the previous hour, working with desperate efficiency, Maria had transformed her apartment into a trap. She had positioned mirrors to create false angles of view from the windows. She had rearranged furniture to create hidden spaces and escape routes. Most crucially, she had prepared what she privately called her insurance policy. The Gestapo officers who entered the apartment found a woman who appeared broken and ready to talk. They began their interrogation immediately, eager to extract information while their prisoner was still demoralized by capture. Maria answered their questions readily, providing names and locations with apparent terror. But every piece of information she gave them was carefully crafted to lead them into an elaborate deception. The safe houses she described were actually German observation posts. The resistance contacts she named were known collaborators who had been feeding information to the enemy. While the Gestapo officers congratulated themselves on their easy victory, Maria was systematically destroying their intelligence network from within their own custody. But the most brilliant aspect of her strategy was yet to be revealed. As the interrogation continued, Maria began showing signs of medical distress. She complained of severe abdominal pain, then collapsed with symptoms that appeared to indicate appendicitis. The German medical officer who examined her declared that emergency surgery was necessary within hours, or the prisoner would die. They transported her to the regional hospital under heavy guard, confident that a sick woman surrounded by armed soldiers posed no threat. It was exactly the mistake Maria had been counting on. The hospital had been chosen carefully. Dr. Elizabeth Beaumont, the chief surgeon, was a secret resistance supporter who had been waiting months for an opportunity to help Maria's network. The medical emergency had been planned down to the smallest detail. While German guards waited outside the operating room, Dr. Beaumont performed what appeared to be life-saving surgery. In reality, she was providing Maria with new identity documents surgically implanted in a waterproof capsule, along with detailed maps of German positions around the hospital. The recovery period provided the perfect cover for escape. Maria would spend 3 days in the hospital, under medical observation, during which time she would somehow vanish from a guarded room on the 3rd floor. But the Germans were not entirely foolish. They suspected that desperation might drive their prisoner to attempt escape, so they took precautions: extra guards, random checks, sealed windows. They did not anticipate that Maria's escape would come not through the window or the door, but through the hospital's morgue. On the 2nd night of her recovery, Maria suffered an apparent cardiac arrest. Despite Dr. Beaumont's desperate efforts, the patient was declared dead at 11:47 p.m. The body was wheeled to the morgue under guard and placed in cold storage, pending transfer to a prison cemetery. At 3 a.m., when the guards had been dismissed and the morgue was empty, Maria Santos walked out of the building, wearing a nurse's uniform and carrying medical supplies for the underground. The woman who had been Maria Santos was officially dead, killed while attempting to recover from surgery. The Gestapo had their victory. They could report that the dangerous saboteur had been captured and eliminated. But somewhere in the mountains above the village, a new identity was being born. Someone who had learned that the greatest weapon against an occupying army was not guns or explosives, but the enemy's own assumptions and expectations. The hunters had become the hunted, but their prey had proven more dangerous than they ever imagined. Now the real war was about to begin. Sister Catherine appeared at the mountain monastery 3 weeks after Maria Santos died in the hospital morgue. The nuns who had run the ancient religious sanctuary for centuries asked few questions about the quiet woman who claimed to be fleeing religious persecution in Spain. War had brought them many refugees seeking shelter and spiritual peace. They could not have known that their newest sister was planning the most audacious counterintelligence operation in the history of the French resistance. The monastery sat on a strategic mountain pass that German forces used regularly for moving supplies and personnel between occupied territories. From her cell window, Maria could observe every convoy, every patrol, every change in enemy routine. But observation was no longer enough. She had died once to escape the hunters, and now she intended to turn them into prey. The transformation from hunted refugee to strategic mastermind had taken months of careful planning. Working with Father Bernard and Dr. Beaumont, Maria had created an entirely new identity, supported by forged documents, manufactured history, and a network of accomplices who could verify her cover story under questioning. But her most powerful weapon was psychological. The Germans believed Maria Santos was dead, which meant they were no longer looking for her. Their attention had shifted to hunting her former associates, unaware that their primary target was studying them from behind convent walls. Maria's first major operation began with a simple observation. Every Tuesday, a German supply convoy carrying communication equipment passed through the valley below the monastery. The route was considered secure because it avoided main roads where resistance fighters might attack. The convoy commander had grown complacent, following the same schedule and security procedures week after week. On a cold February morning, Sister Catherine approached the Mother Superior with a request that seemed perfectly innocent. She wished to establish a small garden where the nuns could grow medicinal herbs. The location she suggested was a terraced hillside overlooking the convoy route, visible from the road, but appearing harmless and natural. What the German drivers could not see was that Sister Catherine's gardening work was actually the construction of an elaborate observation post. Hidden among the herb plots were carefully positioned mirrors that could signal to resistance fighters positioned miles away in the mountains. The timing of her gardening activities corresponded exactly to German convoy schedules, allowing her to relay detailed intelligence about troop movements and cargo contents. Within weeks, German supply lines in the region began experiencing mysterious difficulties. Convoys arrived at their destinations, missing crucial supplies that had somehow vanished during the journey. Spare parts disappeared. Communication equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. Fuel trucks developed inexplicable leaks that left vehicles stranded in remote areas. The German command was baffled. There were no signs of direct attack, no evidence of sabotage that their security teams could identify. The supply problems appeared random and mechanical, but the cumulative effect was devastating to their operations. What they could not detect was the invisible network that Sister Catherine had constructed around their supply routes. Every person who lived or worked along these roads had become her eyes and ears. The farmer who sold vegetables to German mess halls reported which units were running low on specific supplies. The mechanic who serviced German vehicles left tiny marks indicating which trucks were carrying valuable cargo. The innkeeper who served German officers noted which conversations revealed operational vulnerabilities. Maria had learned that the most effective sabotage was not destruction, but misdirection. Instead of blowing up bridges or attacking convoys directly, she manipulated the information flow that German logistics depended on. False reports about road conditions sent convoys down longer, more dangerous routes. Corrupted maintenance schedules caused critical equipment failures at precisely the wrong moments. Subtle alterations to supply requests resulted in units receiving the wrong materials at crucial times. But her greatest triumph came when she discovered the identity of the Gestapo officer who had led the hunt for Maria Santos. Oberfuhrer Heinrich Krüger had been personally responsible for the interrogation methods that had broken so many resistance fighters. He was intelligent, ruthless, and absolutely convinced of German superiority. He had claimed credit for eliminating Maria Santos and had been promoted based on that supposed success. Learning about Krüger became Maria's obsession. She studied his habits, his psychology, his weaknesses. She discovered that he was ambitious, vain, and paranoid about rivals within his own organization. Most importantly, she learned that he was scheduled to inspect security arrangements at a nearby prisoner of war camp. The camp held captured Allied airmen who were awaiting transfer to permanent detention facilities in Germany. Among them were 3 American pilots, whom Maria had failed to rescue before her supposed death. Their capture had haunted her for months, and she had sworn to find a way to help them. Sister Catherine's plan required precise timing and nerves of steel. On the day of Krüger's inspection, she volunteered to deliver food supplies to the camp kitchen, a service the nuns had been providing for months. Hidden among the bread loaves were detailed maps of the camp's security arrangements, guard schedules, and a message explaining the escape plan. But the delivery was only the first part of her strategy. That same afternoon, an anonymous tip reached Krüger's headquarters, suggesting that security at the camp had been compromised by a resistance infiltrator among the staff. The informant claimed to have evidence of the traitor's identity and requested a private meeting to share the information. Krüger took the bait, arranging to meet his mysterious informant at a remote chapel near the camp. He brought only a small escort, confident that he was about to score another intelligence victory. The informant who met him was Sister Catherine, though he did not recognize her as such. She wore civilian clothes and claimed to be a local woman whose brother worked at the camp. Her information seemed credible and detailed, describing security weaknesses that actually existed. What Krüger did not realize was that while he sat in the chapel listening to fabricated intelligence, the 3 American pilots were escaping through carefully prepared routes. Sister Catherine's meeting was designed to keep the Oberfuhrer occupied during the precise window when the escape would occur. By the time Krüger returned to the camp, the prisoners had been gone for hours. The escape was so expertly executed that it appeared impossible. 3 men had somehow vanished from a heavily guarded facility without triggering any alarms or leaving any traces of their escape route. The failure destroyed Krüger's reputation and ended his career. His superiors concluded that he had been completely fooled by resistance intelligence, and his previous claims of success were called into question. Within weeks, he was transferred to a minor administrative position where he could do no further damage to German security operations. But Maria's greatest satisfaction came not from Krüger's downfall, but from the psychological warfare she had waged against the entire German command structure in the region. By the spring of 1944, German officers had lost confidence in their intelligence networks, their security procedures, and their ability to control the territory they occupied. They knew they were being systematically outmaneuvered by an opponent they could not identify or locate. Every success they achieved felt temporary and uncertain. Every operation felt compromised before it began. They were surrounded by enemies they could not see, fighting a war they did not understand against someone who seemed to anticipate their every move. Sister Catherine continued her work until the Allied liberation in August 1944. When American and French forces arrived in the valley, they found a region where German resistance had mysteriously collapsed weeks earlier. Supply lines had failed, communication networks had broken down, and most importantly, German morale had been systematically destroyed by an enemy they never saw coming. The woman who had once been Maria Santos never revealed her wartime identity, even after the war ended. She remained Sister Catherine for the rest of her life, tending her garden and serving the mountain community that had unknowingly sheltered one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the European theater. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind carried voices up from the valley, The other nuns noticed that Sister Catherine would smile to herself as if remembering a private victory. They never learned what those smiles meant. Never knew that their gentle companion had once turned an entire occupying army into prey through nothing more than patience, intelligence, and an unbreakable determination to transform weakness into strength. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hunted had won.